Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for attending another DevOps Live meetup, a virtual meetup. As you all know, we're all going through the same thing, this pandemic. And so, we have to do this to keep safe and keep everyone else safe. A lot of you know that we already postponed our DevOps Days Dallas to August of next year. So just keep an eye on that. Our website is up live. So we're going to reopen it to CFPs later, and registration will open up later next year. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and bring on Kelsey Hightower that a lot of people have been waiting for. Hey, Kelsey, how you doing today?
Hey, what up?
Hey, how's it going? So you've been busy these last few days, haven't you?
Yeah, it's like everybody's doing virtual events, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm like, what's going to happen with all the virtual events?
Conferences. Yeah, I know. It's been busy. Let's check over here. So let's go ahead and start off. Let's see. Let's go ahead and start off with something real quick. Let me bring up this slide deck quick slide that I brought up. So, I've been following you around on Twitter and LinkedIn and Facebook. Everywhere you're at, I'm always watching. But there's a particular, this one thing. Well, let me before we get off to this, why don't you, for those that maybe not know you, which I doubt, why don't you introduce yourself and say a little bit about where you work and what you do?
Yeah, I consider myself a technologist, work at Google Cloud. I do a lot of product work, like on the compute side. Like, hey, what should we be building around some of these open platforms? I'm known these days around Kubernetes, maybe the Go programming language. I have a couple of libraries that I share on GitHub that people use, whether it's a command line tool, a library running your code. And I've worked at a lot of product companies, CoreOS, Puppet Labs.
Right.
But before all of that work, I had many of the jobs maybe people watching have, right? I've been a system administrator, been a software engineer, director of engineering. I've had a lot of roles in my career that just really helps me kind of where I am today, being very empathetic as I'm building and talking about these tools to make sure they will actually work for people.
Right. Yeah, and going on that, kind of spinning off on that empathetic side, there's this, like I was telling that on this slide that I'm going to share here. This caught me by surprise because I was searching on some things, like trying to find your LinkedIn profile, and I didn't see one. Maybe I missed it. But when I was searching, let's see here. When I was searching, I came across this profile from this person that said, about his about statement, basically kind of lists out a question asking you, like, what skills should he invest in to continue in this, and you came back and said people skills. So I kind of, and he kind of hinted that he thought you were going to say something about tools. But you said, no, try to invest in people skills, kind of learn to respect, people and what it is and everyone around you. So when you mentioned that, what were your thoughts around that?
Yeah, everyone thinks that if I learn Jenkins really well, I'll be successful in this tech business. Right. If I learn Kubernetes really well, or if the DevOps badge proudly, I'll be good at this. And honestly, like those titles and groups of things, those are cool. But my success in my career has come from this ability to try to make the people around you better. So when we have a problem that the team is facing, it's the fact that I actually genuinely look at the person and say, hey, what do you actually need as a human being? Not as a DevOps engineer, not as a project manager, not as a software engineer. That doesn't matter too much to me. But as a human, so if you respect people as a human, then you'll talk to them a certain way. You'll understand that they're just trying to go home to their family. This isn't the only thing in their life. This isn't the most important part of their life. They're just trying to get some stuff done. So either you can be helpful or you can't. And if you treat people with that kind of respect, then I think you approach the whole problem different. Like for me and personally, I like to be motivated by my work, right? And I want other people to feel the same, because when people are motivated, you tend to get the best work. And when they do good work, take a second step back and just say, wow, that was pretty dope. What you did was pretty good. And I want to take a minute to acknowledge the fact that what you did was pretty good. And I think if that's your approach, you would treat people different. And it's been the successful thing. So I've seen people spend maybe over index a little too much on getting good at the tools, but then they treat people on their team in a way that's not productive. No one's going to buy into their idea because they're just not the type of person you want to work with. So maybe for some people, getting real people skills, it's not an easy thing to do, is where they should probably invest their time.
Right. How would you say it's a good way to acquire, if you're like, so many people right now have been either furloughed or laid off, and how do you go about getting those people skills? Is it by attending other conferences, meetups? I mean, how could you acquire those skills?
You live in a world full of people.
Yeah.
Right.
True.
So at home, I have a lot of appreciation for my wife and what she does. She goes to work. She has a career. I have appreciation for my daughter and what they do. So I like to clean up. So when they walk into a room or to the house, it's clean.
Yeah.
And I know what that feeling is, because I remember when I walk into like a hotel room, if I'm traveling, you just kind of admire how clean it is, the way it smells, right? So it puts you at ease. It gives you ability to relax. And that just comes from when I'm washing dishes, or if I'm sweeping up or mopping. In my mind is, I can't wait to see their expression when they walk into a clean space and we can enjoy each other without all the clutter. If you're going to the airport, there's so many opportunities to practice this. If someone drops something in the store, maybe you pick it up for them. If someone is looking for something, maybe you ask yourself, can I help? If someone does something nice for you, you can say, hey, I really appreciate the way you're handling my groceries as you're ringing things up, the way you put it in the bag. I really appreciate that. There's just so many little opportunities that we all miss out because we believe that this stuff should happen in a designated area or during a designated time, like a holiday.
Like
but there's so many interactions, right? Just tell people thank you. I see the trash person come, you pick up the trash, you say, hey, I really appreciate what you're doing. Just wanted to say thank you, right? You can do that.
2 simple words. Yep. Very simple.
And it's awkward. So I want to be clear. This is awkward. Some people say, oh, talking to a stranger is awkward. Saying nice things to people for some reason is awkward. So you got to deal with it as a human. It's going to be awkward. But if you practice it enough, it won't be as awkward as you think.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah, and supermarkets, pharmacies, places like that, it's a good place to practice it. Yeah, good point. So let's move on to the next question, because this one kind of interests me here. So I first saw you 2017 doing the speech, and I encourage everybody to go watch this talk because it really touched me when you were talking about everything from modems, and especially you talked about your mother, and it like really choked you up. But at this talk, you went to talking about everything, from A to Z. But I guess what really I wanted to find out during this talk, never got a chance really to kind of ask you here. DevOps has been around for 10 years, and we kind of all agree that even before then, somebody at some point, have been doing it before that. But, and this is a buzzword that keeps sticking around. Why do you think that is? I mean, why do you think DevOps is something that just keeps, like, everybody is like passionate about wanting to learn more tools and more stuff, and not enough of the culture?
I'm going to approach this from a couple of ways.
Okay.
In many ways, I see DevOps and this usage as an excuse.
Right.
It's an excuse. Like, I don't want to deal with people. I'm perpetually working on it. It's not the tools, it's the people. but then you don't see a lot of progress. So what you can do is just say, we're working on the culture. We're practicing DevOps. We're on a journey. And sometimes when you hear this, you're just like, wow, how many excuses are you going to throw at this thing? Because if I come back in 2 years and you're still telling me on this journey, I'm like, what are you doing? At some point you realize you have to learn how to work with people. Dev, ops, marketing, we can throw all the acronyms together and squish them to the next buzzword. But at some point you realize you might be part of the problem. You specifically are probably the problem. Or maybe it's the person next to you that's the problem. And the core of that problem is, what are you actually trying to achieve? Is it to deploy software? There are known ways to deploy software. Mm-hmm. Maybe there's things that you do to get in the way of choosing one of those known ways of doing software, right? Maybe it's the thing where you say, you know what? We've been doing a lot of meetings for the last 9 months. I determined that none of us know what we're doing. We come in here and we literally have no clue on what we're doing. What we've been doing is trying to copy and paste outcomes from other people without understanding how they actually work. And that's okay. But with that realization, you may come to say, well, if we don't know what we're doing, maybe we should try to figure that out first. Maybe it's not copying and pasting this idea called DevOps. Maybe it's not just doing CI/CD because that's what everybody else seems to be doing. Right. That conversation just doesn't happen enough because, again, I'm going back to it. Sometimes people are using, not all the time, but sometimes people are using DevOps as an excuse to keep doing what they're doing and figure it's this long journey that they can just take incremental steps because they've adopted the badge. Look, I'm wearing my DevOps badge.
Yeah.
So I've agreed that I have a problem. So why are you checking for results? Why are you asking for accountability? We're working on it, right? So I think what people have to think about here is that no matter what the buzzword was 10 years ago, what the buzzword will be 10 years from now, you're still going to have to learn how to work with people. Whatever framework you adopt, Agile, DevOps, whatever, it's going to come down to that fundamental thing. And you should learn how to do that. And I think the more you learn how to do that and the people around you learn how to do that, then maybe these frameworks aren't required.
Right. How about it evolving into maybe something else? Will there ever exist? I mean, there's people talking about AI, maybe a new way to do things that's not DevOps. People talk about different things, maybe SRE. Is there anything that you think that at some point we might evolve into something new, something different?
So this is interesting because the fundamental thing we're doing, we're writing software that we copy to servers and we get requests from people doing stuff. That's the fundamental thing, right?
Yeah.
So until that fundamental thing changes, how you practice that, you can call it whatever you want. You can call it ops, you can call it DevOps, you can call it SRE.
Yeah.
The fundamental thing is the same. So if you're looking for what will be different, is when the thing you're doing changes, right? So if we start doing something fundamentally different, for example, when I meet people that do mobile development, they say none of these things. It's the people I meet. You write your app, like if you're going to iPhone, you open up Xcode, Apple has the libraries, you test your thing, you put in the app store, and just like that, 300, 500 million people can download your app at the same time, and you can go and do continuous updates if you chose. You can update that thing every hour if you chose. Why? Because there's a pipeline and standard in place, right? You're not coming in doing whatever you want. There is someone that says, hey, this is how it's going to work at scale. We don't need to have a debate. Well, I want a different app store because I'm Enterprise X. So we're going to get our own app store and we're going to build an app store from scratch. When you get into that territory, now you start to get into a lot of the people problems. Either people don't necessarily have the skill to build their own app store and maintain it. You got people with decision paralysis on where to even run the app store. all of that
That's a good
becomes
point.
into like the parts where humans sometimes aren't that great, right? So then you start
Right.
to have other issues that are not tech related. So I think in some new spaces where the path is clear, then you get optimal results because you take away some of the areas where most humans fall apart, right? It's like, nope, this is the way you do it, right? So I think that's what I would pay attention to. So if you want to see what the next thing is, watch when the thing underneath changes dramatically, and then a new set of practices will be required. Right now, we're just talking about practices on a 40-year set of fundamentals.
Right. Or something maybe like Agile just keeps evolving a little bit at a time. And
Yep, call it what you want, right? It's this idea that how do we break up the work, right? And this sounds really good on the manufacturing line like Toyota, right? Where you're saying, hey, we're going to make cars. They have very clean specifications. We know what done looks like we know what a done car looks like, right?
Right.
The equivalent of software engineering is like, well, maybe we don't need the hood right now. Do we really need a windshield? We're not driving that fast. Are seatbelts really required for this particular car? Maybe we'll get to the seatbelts in the next sprint. See, these are like the outcomes are just so different in software that trying to take a rigid framework that's presuming that you already have a factory, right? So in that whole analogy area or this kind of agile world where, you already have a factory. So then the decision is, what should we build with this factory? Most companies that are trying to do agile don't even have CI/CD. They don't even have a factory. So they're spending a lot of time. Should we build a factory? Should we even automate anything? Like, I don't know if that's agile quite yet. You don't have the framework and the infrastructure to support the decision velocity.
Right. I guess probably expanding a little bit on that. Is there companies that you think might not need to do agile or do DevOps, practices as, because I see a lot of companies kind of ask me, we're not big enough shop. We're not, and it always boils down to either they don't want to do it or they think they're not big enough or they're way too big to do it.
The truth is DevOps can't lay claim on human interaction. So like really, what does DevOps have to do with humans working together? Like it has like little to do with it. You may use that word to describe a situation, how, maybe looking back at the past and say when people weren't working together, that was not DevOps. People then decided to work together in a certain style. Maybe we have stories about how some companies made a transition. Maybe we have examples and then we put a label on that example and we call it DevOps. For a lot of these companies, they may be saying, we ain't got time for the stories right now. Maybe we don't have time for these abstract cultural things. Maybe some companies can do better with the idea of like, show me the cultural thing you're actually talking about. Don't just say DevOps without context. And I think a lot of companies already have a culture. And now what we're asking them to do is change it. But they're not sure why. And most people that talk about this stuff aren't sure why either. They're just saying all cultures can use improvement. Your culture in particular. And if you improve that culture, you'll get an outcome that's desirable, which, to be honest, is probably not a factual statement. It's not necessarily true. Even if your team worked together, it may not save your business. Maybe it's too late for you, right? But I think there is always a net good in examining how your people work together. And if DevOps is the framework to get you thinking about that, then so be it. But maybe that's not the only way we can communicate those ideas.
Gotcha. Okay, so moving on to the next question I had. So I followed you. I was in 2017 at DevOps Days Austin, and then like 2 or 3 months later, I saw you again at ChefConf here at this presentation. And we talked about, let me see, this is it. Yeah. With there's so many technologies, what drives your passion to, hold on a second. It's this question. Actually, that was this one. Yeah, what drives your passion around, focused around cloud and app runtimes? Because at this conference, people could go watch it later. You were in your hotel, and you have always been known to do Kubernetes in a lot of fashion and in the cloud. But then you said at this conference, you learned something new that day. What drove your passion to learn like Habitat?
Habitat was their particular product. So look, I'm at Chef Conf, that's their hometown.
Yeah, exactly.
And their team worked really hard on a new product idea, and they're trying to move things forward. And when I think about the keynote is meant to inspire people, maybe teach them a thing or two about something new. And the thing, it gets me excited. So if I come there and I just talk only about Kubernetes again, well, I'm tired of talking about Kubernetes. But when I look at Habitat, that really piqued my interest. And I say, you know what I want to do? I want to incorporate this new thing into my keynote, because the way I'm feeling, as excited as I am seeing it for the first time, I want to translate that energy in the keynote to people that are watching. Because I know that if I'm excited and I'm up at night working on this thing and I'm feeling a certain way, it's going to shine through when I present. And it's a thing that I need. I need that motivation to do that. So the passion, honestly, is going back to that human thing. When I feel a certain way, I know I'm onto something, right? If I can make sure that, if I can feel it and it resonates well with me, there's a chance it's going to resonate well with others. And then learning in general has been the thing that's like changed my life repeatedly. When you start thinking about what you're going to be once you graduate high school, there's only so many routes you can go. But then when you find something that you're actually good at, like for me, it was technology, but every step of the way, I just saw positive outcomes in my life every time I was able to gain new knowledge, right? Not just new tools, but the fundamentals behind those tools. When I really got good at that, that's when I saw things take off for me. And I've met so many people that's the same way. So if I have an opportunity to learn something and then to teach it to others, that's the passion that drives me to get really good at this area.
Right, I see. Yeah, that's one of the things that I was reading also, like in a blog that you put, that somebody quoted you saying that you're looking, that the blog was called "Looking to Build a Sustained Personal Brand," and they mentioned that you covered fair wide range of technologies, but it was mostly around cloud and app time, and I've seen you so diverse in so many different things, that including culture and people. I mean, you're a very diverse person in that sense. I also want to reach out to the people that are online. If you have any questions, go ahead and post them. I'm coming up on my last question here, and we want to hear from the audience. Anybody out there, just post your questions, and we'll have Kelsey answer them. So going on this, then my last question kind of referred to, let's see here. It was around this particular statement that I saw quoted on Twitter that you talked about. A second here. Yeah, that you talked about gRPC, and my question is, not gRPC, but let me see here. It was regarding CRDs.
Let's dive into that a little bit.
If
you look at the web, most people were familiar with the web browser, right? The website. Right. You click on the web browser, you get something from a web server. Ideally, you're looking at a website. And that was so revolutionary, right? Some people call it the web, some people call it the internet. But what we found is that communication protocol, HTTP, if we extract it out of its original design or use case, we can build other systems like RESTful interfaces, APIs, why we have a whole industry around taking HTTP and use it to build other communication protocols, right? There's databases, I think like MongoDB, that have an HTTP interface. So now I can make database interactions using curl. So this is a very powerful thing to extract from something that had like a different purpose to begin with. Now, when you look at Kubernetes, what is its thing that we will extract, right? No matter how long Kubernetes lives on, behind the scenes there, the driving force for most people is this declarative infrastructure, but in this Kubernetes way. This idea that we can structure our parameters and give them types and definitions, and then define a life cycle around those things, right? That status field is so important. When I say, hey, Kubernetes, run this load or create this load balancer for me, and the fact that it will take ownership of that declarative resource, right? Just a quick YAML statement. And then down there at the bottom, it's reconciling the world to get me that load balancer. And then when it's done, it sticks the IP in the status field. And then at that point, that resource definition, some people would just say that YAML file, becomes the source of truth between your intentions and what the world actually is to see if it meets that intention. That whole control loop is something we've talked about for a long time. Promise theory, Mark Burris and all those folks that started CF Engine. We see it in Puppet, Chef, Ansible, and Terraform, right? Those are evolutions of this idea around promise theory. But when you look at Kubernetes, it seems to be a very generic implementation of this promise theory, right? So now in the Kubernetes world, you have to write these controllers that are decoupled from the actual thing that they're controlling. They don't just run on the server, and the interface is reusable. So it's expressed in the form of data. So to me, it was the key to unlocking the extensibility of Kubernetes, because Kubernetes has so many places that are just based on control loops and a data model, right? I give you my containers, the scheduler watches those and then places them on nodes. So in many ways, that's a CRD, and the scheduler is just another controller. But the nice thing about this is they're all deployed and pretty much specified in the same way. So when you create your own, you are now a first-class citizen for the most part in the Kubernetes world. So this statement about what Brendan did, I think he asked a question, and maybe there were others, but I remember it coming uniquely from him when we were both working at Google together. And he was sitting there, it's like, what if people could actually generate their own APIs and get all of this machinery for free? So there's a project called API Machinery, which does a lot of this work, but it's baked into the Kubernetes API server. But this is the foundation for our HTTP. This is the foundation for our RESTful moment. And then if you scale out from here, we get into this other tweet that you have next to there, which is Mitchell Hashimoto, the founder of HashiCorp. And what he's talking about here is that it's amazing how things have evolved. The nice thing about Terraform, it's been managing resources for a long time. Traditionally, you're calling cloud provider endpoints. They're RESTful APIs, and you're using HCL to make those calls. But that requires a lot of orchestration from Terraform. I've written a couple of providers myself in the Terraform community and contributed them. And you do a lot of work in your provider. You have to control the full life cycle of the resources that you're managing. This announcement from Mitchell yesterday, May 26, 2020, Mitchell talks about, look, if Kubernetes is going to be this new RESTful target, just like the cloud provider control planes, then wouldn't it be nice if Terraform was able to take those custom resource definitions, and now at this point, the life cycle is really about managing the life cycle of the definition, not the infrastructure behind it. And that's a really powerful combination, right? HCL has it's a richer syntax, lots of things like dry runs and Terraform plan. There's so many things that Terraform can do, but it's a good bridge between the existing world where you call cloud provider APIs and maybe this world that Kubernetes is proposing. But now you can do both in a single tool. So that's where this whole space is getting super interesting. And this is all fairly new as of, literally yesterday.
I know everything. Because you posted this on the 21st, and then he immediately posted this yesterday. I mean, it's evolving pretty quickly. But thank you very much for that explanation, because it does make a lot of sense. I have here another question from the audience here. Mark Sharma. You see that on the screen there?
Yeah, so have a question on the difference of SRE, Site Reliability Engineering, and DevOps. Is SRE a new buzzword over DevOps now? I think the right way to think about this, because I'm working at Google, and for many cases, people consider Google, maybe it's factual, that SRE started at Google, Site Reliability Engineering, okay?
Right.
And a lot of people that do work in SRE, these are legit software engineers with the focus on site reliability. That's the way Google practices SRE. It is a core engineering discipline. Now, the reason why I'm emphasizing this is that, and there's no wrong way to practice. You're practicing. Some people have taken their operational teams that may not necessarily have adopted a lot of software engineering principles. Maybe they do a lot of things manually. And I've seen on the extreme end, people try to attempt to rebrand that kind of team and give them the label of site reliability engineer, right? That's like taking me and saying, you know what, today we're going to brand Kelsey as an all-star NBA player. Doesn't mean it's true.
Yeah.
Right? Even if I go play basketball a little bit on the weekends, doesn't necessarily mean that I'm operating the way an NBA player does. Yeah. But is that a problem? See, there's no problem with that because maybe I don't need to be an NBA player caliber. Right? For my needs, I'm just playing on the weekend. Mm-hmm. I'm just playing basketball. So the way I think about SRE is the culture where it comes from. A place like Google, where site reliability is a dedicated discipline that has a lot of overlap with operations. And then the DevOps idea, some would say one is a subset of the other, right? Culturally, SRE works because there's a deep collaboration between people focused on reliability and people building things that need to be reliable. That's that coupling, right? It's almost in the name, site reliability engineering. These are just two disciplines that are being kind of work hand in hand. And in DevOps, some people will look at the practice, remember, the practice of site reliability to be a form of DevOps, right? This idea that you take these two separate disciplines and teams and you work together for a common outcome. I would say if DevOps is the interface, then SRE will be the implementation, right? It's only one of those implementations. So the way I would look at it is, it's not really about the difference. Sometimes you need concrete implementations of these high-level ideas. And when you say, hey, our team is doing DevOps, I can get a bit confused. I'm not sure what they're doing. So when you say my team is doing or practicing site reliability engineering, then it becomes a little bit clear what your team might actually be doing. So I don't know if it's about a buzzword, but it's the way people practice things. And you can look into those cultures and see how they practice, what tools they use, how they work with each other, and what outcomes that they're after.
Right. I think this other question from Mark as well is on the same was part of that.
Yeah, are the two stacks different for different practices? So the tool stack, I'm going to guess. So
I guess, he's talking about SRE and DevOps. Yeah, the tool stacks.
So we kind of said that I would say one is, like I said, this idea. One is more of a concrete implementation, in my opinion.
Right.
The tools you use to do either could be the same, right? If your team is using the cultural movement started by DevOps as a way to getting to better reliability by working together, you might find yourself using the exact same tools because you're choosing to focus your DevOps practice in a particular area, in this case, reliability. But let's say you chose to have your focus of DevOps in building iOS apps. Then you actually might be using a different set of tools, right? Maybe using something from the Apple ecosystem. So this is why I think you got to be really clear about what's the problem that you're mapping SRE or any of these ideas to. And that tends to be where you start to figure out what tools are required.
Right, because you could be using monitoring tools for both. You could be using communication tools like Slack or Teams or anything, to communicate between the same, both DevOps and SRE.
Yeah, if you're a DevOps person or you're in site reliability engineering and one of your goals is to be able to measure or set SLAs or SLOs, then what tool do you define those in?
Right.
How do you know if you're actually meeting your SLAs and SLOs? And once you start to ask that question, that's when the tools start looking similar, right? Because you got a similar question, and then the tools start to have a similar solution. So this is where I think the similarities start to overlap as long as you're dealing with some of the same outcomes.
Right. Let's go over here, and then we'll jump back. Got this other question from, let's see here.
Yeah, funny that things have become declarative fact tables that can reconcile against a desired state. That was part of the magic about Prolog. Yeah, this isn't new, right? I think a lot of the functional programming paradigms back in the day, because you have to put this complexity somewhere. And I think this is where people get into this weird argument about declarative versus imperative. Those control loops in Kubernetes are very much imperative. They have all kind of side effects. But what we're trying to do is isolate that complexity to the control loop. And if we do a good job there, then we can define a very clean API in front of it, right? And it takes a while to evolve these control loops to really enforce the contract from their declarative state. And the only thing that Kubernetes has kind of forced is you have to put the logic in the control loop, because in the declarative config, we don't allow any programming logic. That's why there's such a clean boundary in the Kubernetes space, because there's not a lot of escape hatches in the front end. So this is why you find a lot of consistency in how we drive and reconcile to that desired state.
Gotcha. Here we go with another one, Aaron Mill.
What advice would you give someone trying to build their brand, not just for themselves, but also for the company they work for?
That's a good question.
Yeah, that's a great question, because even if you leave your company, you remain.
Yeah.
Right? You got to keep that in mind. You is a personal brand. So your personal brand may or may not be compatible with the current company you work at. Or it can change faster than you know. Yeah. That company you joined 4 years ago may not be the same company you identify with all of its values later on. And if you don't do a good job separating those two, you're going to believe that you are now different because your company changed. That's not, to me, how I operate. So I think your personal brand is, who are you? And ideally, it's who you are independent of the company you work for. There are a lot of people that work at companies that don't reflect their values or who they are outside of that job. And some of these people, you don't even know where they work, right? They choose to keep those two things separate. So you as a person can have a certain persona. Ideally, you can be a little bit more human, because a company is just a collection of people. So now we got to ask ourselves, well, who runs the company at this given time? What's the situation around that company, right? Because companies exist primarily to make a profit, ideally selling goods and services to other people. So the company itself, it's really hard for it to have its own identity. So what you want ideally is that your company hires the right people that, as an aggregate, they reflect some values that they all rally behind. Because even if a company adopts a certain values but no one follows them, what does that actually mean? So to me, my advice would be, one, separate yourself from your company's brand. Sometimes it will have synergy. Like where I work, there's a lot of synergy for the stuff that I do in my current employer's brand. But at the same time, you got to make sure that you can live without necessarily what your company is doing. You need to have your own personal identity, because people will resonate with you as a person than the company you represent. I want a relationship with you, not the company, because your company can never high five or hug me back, right? You can't, right? So decouple yourself from your company and the tools you're using, because those things are only the now. They don't necessarily go with you when you decide to leave, right? So I think that's the key here. Figure out who you are, who you want to be, and it's sustainable. And the last thing I'm going to make on this is, some people pick a brand that excites the crowd. For example, some people like to be angry all the time. That is not natural. You cannot be angry all the time, because that might lead to some serious mental issues for yourself. That's a hard emotion to carry all day long.
Burnout. A lot of burnout.
Yeah, and a lot of people might have moments where they're angry, and you should.
Yeah.
But sometimes people will rise into popularity because of that.
Right.
And if you try to change your whole persona and brand to identify with that and be that person, that's not a sustainable thing you can do forever.
No, not at all.
So you want to find something that's a little bit more you and natural, because if it's natural, then it's sustainable. You don't have to work on it. You don't have to try to put on a mask before you start speaking. It's just who you are, and you will evolve over time.
Yep.
And that's okay, because people do.
Yeah. I've seen so many people, like you said, they follow that anger and eventually it just consumes them. They burn out eventually. It's tough. But let's get here to another question.
Was there an aha moment for you in life that made you realize it was more about people than technology? Were there people in your life that you look to for that sort of inspiration? Yeah, so that DevOps days.
That one. Yeah.
I told a story about like my mom teaching herself to touch type, and I was very young when that happened. But she was a seamstress, kind of working in like a factory, and you go in, you do your job, you leave. But then I remember she wanted something better for her life and her kids. So she decided to apply for a job at the US Customs, but you had to learn how to touch type. It was part of the thing. And they asked her how fast she could type. And she says, "What's fast?" Right? So she buys a book, she learns to type. And all the technology, she didn't go to a typing conference. She didn't do a, type native journey.
Right.
She taught herself a set of technology skills so she can get a better life. Right. That's the approach that she took. But it would take me many years to realize the difference between the two. When I got into tech, I was all about learning Bash and Linux and all these technical things. And those things were not the things that made me stand out. I was really good at them. But I would learn that was my actual personality. And I remember you take clues from different people in life. I remember getting out of a cab one time, going to the airport. And the guy smiled as I got out of the cab. He says, your attitude will determine your altitude.
Wow.
And I noticed that whenever I have a good idea, a good attitude when I approach a situation, man, that outcome is dope. Yeah. And it's something that I say, you know what? That's true, because I can actually look at parts of my life. So you get a lot of this inspiration from lots of people when you start to realize this. So the aha moment for me was, I remember when I started adopting minimalism. Yeah. I've been wearing this same shirt for like 2 or 3 years. I have 7 of them. And I remember going to Europe for the first time, and I had, I don't know, maybe 2 suitcases. And one guy's like, "Why do you have all these clothes?" I was like, "I need something for every day of the week." He's like, "I'm gonna be honest with you, man. No one is paying attention to what you're wearing right now. I promise you." So I said, "Oh, let me switch it up a little bit. I'm just gonna bring 5 of the same shirts, 2 pairs of jeans, and see what happens." And no one asked me anything about my outfit. And I started to realize that just doesn't matter, at least for me. And I get it, there's other scenarios for other people where that matters. But for me, these were miniature aha moments that built up over time that made me realize there's something to the person behind their actions, the person behind the tools, that matters more than anything else. And that's just how I roll now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good one. And if no one has any more questions, I think this is probably going to end and close our question.
Is declarative becoming the new language for automation? And what do you think of the difference with Python? This is a really good question, because the way I like to separate this is, and it may not be the perfect analogy,
okay,
but when we think about programming languages, especially for something like the Intel architecture. So Intel basically has a set of system calls or assembly language, basically a common denominator that regardless of how you generate it, right? I think 2 years ago, I was writing some assembly by hand just to remind myself that it is possible. It's not a thing I would recommend.
No, I know.
It's definitely possible. But if you take Python, Java, Golang, Node.js, whatever it is, more than likely they're generating this machine code underneath the covers. And that's the common layer. So that way you can have your own taken opinion about how you want to generate that code, right? If you want to make an HTTP connection, that's some very wicked code to try to write from hand in assembly. I don't think most people I know can't do that from scratch.
Right.
But luckily for us that our compilers can, and our standard libraries can. So if you identify with the approach from Node.js or JavaScript, then you use their methods, right? They'll give you something a little bit closer to the human way of explaining what you want the computer to do. So in your question, is declarative becoming the new language for automation? I think the answer is no. I think declarative, when we start talking about things that you can put in a YAML file, it's funny Kubernetes doesn't even support YAML. Like that's a front end thing that
Yeah.
kubectl takes in, translates to JSON, and then I think protocol buffers is now stored in etcd. So YAML's for your convenience. But when you think about this, is that this declarative approach, more of it's like data. And the fact that we can express our intentions in this declarative data model, that's becoming what I believe is the new assembly layer. So if you like to write Python to generate configuration code, then use Python. Some people like Pulumi, which allows you to do multiple languages and it has its own library. Terraform has HCL. The Ansible folks are using Python. The Chef and Puppet people are using Ruby.
Right.
That's all front-end technology. But in the world of Kubernetes, no matter which tool you pick, they all have to generate, AKA assembly, otherwise known as YAML files. And then they have to submit them to the machine for processing. What's dope about this is if you get tired of Python, you can move to Ruby, suck in that data model, and then continue doing infrastructure as code all you want. So I think this is the new layers that we finally now realized that we should have the assembly equivalents for infrastructure so that our tools aren't always re-implementing the same REST calls over and over again in every programming language, and then trying to take ownership of lifecycle management. Now we can isolate lifecycle management into a control loop, regardless of what language it's written in, doesn't have any bearing on what you choose as a front end. We define that data model in the middle, and then just think about everything else as just a front end. It could be a web UI, it could be a mobile UI. The only contract is you must generate the same data model that gets fed into the machine.
Gotcha. It's a good one. So one last, I guess I'm going to cut it off at this one. What words of advice or wisdom do you have for anyone that is just starting their career in IT, whether it be DevOps, SRE, whatever it is, developers, testers, what word of advice do you have for people that are starting new, that are going to begin this continuous learning?
Yeah, the advice I have is you're so lucky to be in the field that will pay you to learn on the job.
On the job. Yeah.
It is, you need to make sure you can appreciate that faster than you know.
Right.
And what I'm saying by this is you may not work at the same company for 20 or 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
You may have to switch companies to get a return on investment from your continuous learning. That's just part of the business.
Right.
But the fact is, this is an industry that really does pay for you to keep your skills sharp.
Mm-hmm.
And you got to remember where these skills come from. Sometimes you'll be thrown into a set of work where you're going to get to sharpen your skills, but be careful. I've met people that have been doing this for 20 years, but they only have the equivalence of 1 year experience because their job didn't force them to go any further than what most people would learn in 1 year on the job, even though they have 20 years of experience. They only have 20 years doing 1 year work. So you gotta pay attention to that. And the other thing is the learning is your responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
I meet a lot of people that's like, my company won't send me to training. My company didn't do any training on this new tool. That's why I don't know it. Yeah. That's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
This is your life. This is your career. And to increase your value, you have control. This stuff is accessible.
Mm-hmm.
This stuff is, most of it's free.
Right.
Most people in this community, whether it's Mike or myself, you can probably reach out to us and ask us a question and probably get our time, and we will treat you like a human being, and we will also invest in your own education.
Right.
But the responsibility is on you to actually take this part super serious. A lot of people in this career think that I'm just going to learn the thing I got hired for, Linux system administration, or I'm going to be a web developer. And that's cool. Nothing wrong with that. You get in the door, you do a good job at that. But remember, that's just a small box that HR put in to some job title somewhere.
Right.
Nothing is stopping you from expanding your scope. Learn how databases work when it makes sense. Yeah. Learn how programming language X works as it makes sense. So see this as a big investment of yourself or into yourself. So when you do join a company and you do join a team, make sure that you can bring value to that team. And the last thing I'm going to say from here is that all the things you will learn will not come from books, online courses, and just documentation that you read. If you're lucky, you're going to learn a lot of stuff from other human beings.
Right.
If you're the type of person that knows how to work well with others, if you're going to ask for help, make sure you do some grunt work first. Yeah. Try everything and then ask for people. Right. But once you start to build a good relationship, the next thing you're going to get is you're going to get the ability to accelerate your learning by some exponential factor. If you learn how to ask questions and be respectful of other people's time, listen to them, like truly listen, learn from all sources, not just the people that look like the engineers, right, or the people who you think you should respect. You can learn something from everybody. If you're a senior engineer, you can learn from junior engineers.
Oh, definitely.
Right? Sometimes there's a lot of value in having a fresh pair of eyes looking at something. So don't sell yourself short and create a very limited learning pipeline. Keep it as broad as possible. If you don't agree with something or it doesn't work for you, take it in. Maybe you don't use it, but there's still value in knowing what you don't need.
Definitely. I mean, I've told that to many people that it doesn't matter how senior you are, you know, you could always learn from somebody junior because it's a new set of eyes. It has a different, different perspective on things.
We got one more question that just popped in.
Yeah, I just saw it.
Yeah, let's go into that. How do you balance work and life?
That's a good one.
With the family, this is a challenge I face, and there are only so many hours in a day. So I'm going to give a little bit of what I don't think they're secrets, but things that I do. So the fact that I like to clean, I make sure that I'm not falling short on my family responsibilities, right? I have a wife and a daughter. I've been married 14 years.
Awesome.
There's times where I travel a lot and I know that my wife is probably picking up slack that I can't even see, things that I can't even thank her for. So I make sure that I don't miss the opportunities to go to the grocery store, to make sure that I do a lot of the shopping. I do a lot of the cleaning. I do these things intentionally because I need to make sure that I'm balancing out things I can't even see. Right. So this balance thing can be tricky because what you see may not necessarily be the thing you need to balance against, right? You might be missing some context. So I understand for myself that I'm working for a reason, right? Some people say you're working to live. I don't live to work. So keeping all that in mind, the way I think about this is I need to get a lot of return on investment for the work that I'm doing. So if I'm hacking on some side project, I like to make sure that that side project is actually contributing in some cases. Doesn't always have to be the case. But in some cases, it's nice when the side project contributes to the things that I need to do at the job. And that thing contributes to maybe the next keynote or talk that I'm going to do. So I'm trying to get this triple return on any investment that I'm doing because that's how I keep the balance, right? I don't want to have 5 separate lanes stressing myself out. And then honestly, I'm going to be very honest. There are parts in my career where it's not balanced. It is by no means balanced. You're working 60 hours a week, and it's probably not healthy for a lot of people. And in my life, the burnout typically only came when I'm not being successful when I invest 60 hours in, right? I've been feeling the feel of burnout with 40 hours or 30 hours when I'm not seeing progress. So 60 hours with a lot of progress feels a lot better than 30 hours with no progress, in my opinion. But when I look at my whole career over that big time span, you start to see the opportunities. Like when my daughter was born, I didn't work for a while, took 3 months off to spend time primarily with my daughter, right? So there's just different things you got to do. But remember, it's a long timeline. Trying to keep a balance every day, every month, every year may not be what we mean by balance. It might be over the course of your career. If you're single now, maybe you go all out to build a foundation so that when you do have a family, you can dial it back a little bit. And sometimes it helps to plan this out and see what the opportunities are. So, and then also I like to pick a place that aligns with where I want to be with life, right? I've had opportunities where I can make maybe more money working somewhere else, but I choose not to because it doesn't align with my life choices, right? And then once you become more talented or add more value, man, do you get to start to align a lot of what you do to your life because people will say, hey, we want to hire the whole person. And if that means you working remote or you work in a certain schedule because you have to optimize for your life, we'll take it. Deal.
Yep. That's it. That's very good advice. And you mentioned 14 years. Today is my 20th anniversary. So I need to go spend some time with my wife now.
Happy anniversary.
Thank
and
you,
congratulations.
Thank you. And where's your next conference or next virtual meetup?
You know what? I don't even know. It's so funny because
we'll follow you on Twitter then and to figure it out.
Yeah, follow me on Twitter. I try to tweet them maybe a week ahead of time, but since I'm not getting on planes, these are so much more convenient to do.
Oh, I know. And I thank you for taking time, away from your family and stuff to do this. I mean, it does help the community a lot. And, with that, I just want to say thank you and we'll see you later.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Okay. Take care.